So I missed last week, had a terrible stomach virus. So thankful for Michael, who stepped in with like 18 minutes notice to come and share the word with you this morning. So if you see, that's not his thing. He is not a last minute get up here. And so if you would, when you see him this morning, would you just give him a hug and say thank you so much for doing that last week. I'm so grateful to have somebody who I can call in between episodes, if I can call it that. And he can come and fill us with just point us to truth, point us to Jesus. So if you were to come to my house and look at the bookshelf that's behind our couch, you would find these hardback books that my wife had drawn up, printed up, published, that are basically pictures from vacations and kids' trips and just little random little things around the house, going to park, whatever. And if you were to flip through these hardback books for more than a couple of minutes, and especially if you were to see our oldest daughter and our middle daughter, it wouldn't take you long to recognize, hey, those are definitely your kids. Like if you didn't even know that they were our kids and you were to see a picture of us and then a picture of our children, you would start to see some things that make the Cochran family the Cochran family. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to show you some pictures here. So put up the first one, Heath. So that little sailor right there is yours truly. So that's torture. Let's stop putting kids in sailor suits. So I took a picture 3 or 4 years old. Now, this just notice some things. Pug nose. That's one thing to note about this picture. Dimples, golden blonde hair, round face, no chin. Still true today. So that's me. Now let me show you this second picture. That is our oldest daughter, Riley Grace. And you'll start to notice a couple of things. Pug nose, round cheeks, no chin, golden blonde hair, and then this is a picture of our baby, Lena Beth. And if you can get past the adorableness, she's got pug nose, fluffy cheeks, round face, no chin. So those are some things that make up the Cochran family. And you would think if you saw those pictures, yeah, those are your girls. But then there are a couple of other traits that make up the Cochran family. So let me show you a picture of my wife. It's her birthday, so why not embarrass her? So this is our. I got permission to share this. Everybody chill. This is my precious, beautiful wife. Now notice some things. Not a pug nose. Just blazing red hair. And then I want to show you a picture of our middle daughter. That's Nora Lynn. Looks a spitting image. And if you were to put them side by side, same kind of nose, same kind of teeth, big, bright, beautiful teeth, red hair. Now, in case you're not seeing it, let me show you this other one. This is probably my favorite of the two. That is on the on the left. That is my wife, and on the right, that is our middle daughter. And they, same person, basically, just separated by about 30 years. So that's part of what makes the Cochran family the Cochran family. Pug noses and round chins and big, beautiful teeth and a lot of gums. And so that's part of how we roll here. And my guess is if we were to go to your house and pull out some photo albums, we'd see some things too. Maybe you got some tall people in your family. Maybe you got some loud voices in your family. Maybe you got some similar hair. Maybe you just bald from 100 years of baldness. Whatever your story is, that's kind of how your crew is wired. You got some, what I just call family traits, some things that make your family. And that's true of a family, like a biological family, but it's also true of an organization. And in particular, it's true of churches. Like we have things that make us who we are, that are part of our DNA as a faith family, not a biological family, but a faith family, a spiritual family. So every organization, every church has a set of what we call core values, but you might also think of them as family traits that make us who we are and what we are and determine kind of how we operate. And so that's just true. That's true of every organization and every church. The reason we want to have this conversation about core values over the next couple of weeks is this. The question for every church, in a similar way to the reality of a family, we just have some traits. The question for every church is, do our practiced values, the things we actually do, line up with our principled values, the things we hold to be true in principle from the Bible. So we just got to ask that question regularly because we want the answer to be yes. Right, we want to look at the scriptures and say, here's some things that have to be true of a church if it's going to be biblical. And then we got to ask this question, do our practiced values, what we actually do, sync up with our principled values, what we say we believe? That's a healthy question we should always ask. And so we want to take some time every year just to ask this question and just remind you, what are our core values, our core commitments that make up who we are, so that if you were to cut our church, what would spill out in our DNA are these 5 commitments. And that gets us to our text this morning. So let me just, as you're turning there, Acts chapter 2, if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn there, Acts chapter 2. Let me just remind you why this is important, because you might be thinking, all right, Patrick, we do this core values thing every year. We get it. Do we have to spend time on this? And yes, it's healthy for us to do this for 2 reasons. First, and you have this on the screen. Core values, they shape our future. So we lay down some core commitments, draw a line in the sand. These are 5 things we're going to be about that are going to help shape our identity and inform who we want to become. But core values also, they don't just shape our future, they keep us focused. And that's really important. They keep us focused. So yesterday, my daughter had a cheer thing out somewhere in nowhere, Brookwood, somewhere. So we get into the truck. I don't have a clue where this is. So we get into my father-in-law's truck, and we punch in this obscure address on the phone, and it's supposed to pop up on the phone, on the GPS, but it's not working. So there's no communication between the phone and the truck. So we're just sitting there. We don't know where we're supposed to go, don't have a clue how to get there. We're just sitting there in an idling truck for a few minutes so we can get the GPS to sync up, lock up, and get us on our way. And without any kind of core values, some family traits, some fundamental commitments, a church becomes a lot like that. We're just kind of idling week after week without any clear sense of where we're headed, get distracted, lose focus, don't quite know what's next, why we're on this journey, what we're doing here. So core values help us answer the why question. They don't just help us answer who we are, so that if you're new here this morning, as you hear the next couple of weeks, it's a great time to be here because this is a chance for you to hear about who we want to be as a church. But core values also help determine where we're going and why we're going. Like, what are we doing here? That's part of what's answered in this question about core values. So what are our values? And really the question I want us to answer over the next couple of weeks is, how do we begin to live those out? How do we keep cultivating these values so that they become part of the furniture of our church? Acts chapter 2 is where we're going to be as we answer that question. We're going to pick it up in verse 42. Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 42. If you're kind of new to the Bible, this is just basically a description of how the early church, the first Christians, operated. What were they committed to as a church? That's a model for us as a church 2,000 years later who professes the same Jesus, worships the same King, but we're in a monumentally different culture, different period of time, different part of history. So we got to look at this and then ask the question, how does this land on us this morning and for the next couple of weeks? Acts chapter 2, we'll start in verse 42 and read through verse 47. Luke, who wrote this book, tells us this. They, the first Christians, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, with reverence, with profound respect and reverence for God. And many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. And now all the believers were together and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and their property, which is kind of a unique thing, and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Every day, they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple, so worship was a priority for them. And they broke bread from house to house. So was sharing meals, like we're going to do later. They ate their food with joyful and sincere hearts, which is how I ate that Denny dog yesterday. It cost me $14. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And watch what happened. As they walked in obedience, what happened? Every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. So from this text, we get 5 values that we're committed to as a church here at Forest Lake. And I just want to give you, we'll do one this week, and then the rest of the remaining 4 over the next 2 weeks. All I'm going to do is just lay it out before you, give you what we mean by it, explain it, and then really smash the clutch, yank the wheel to very practically, how can you as an individual sitting where you are help us as a church step into and cultivate these values? So be good, that's where we're going. Here's the first one that we see from Acts 2:42 through 47. Here at Forest Lake, one of our core values is community. Community, and here's what we mean by that. We are committed to doing 3 things when it comes to community: knowing, loving, and building up one another as we strive to grow in Christ together. So that's one of our core commitments, one of our fundamental values, one of the things that we want to be a part of the DNA of our church. Now, where are we getting that? If you look back in verse 42, it says this: they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship. Now, that word fellowship, it's this Greek word koinonia. Koinonia, and it just means they were doing, one translation has real life together. They were doing real life together in koinonia. In koinonia, that word literally means the act of sharing in the activities or privileges of, listen to this, an intimate association or group. To be in communion, community, partnership. That's how they operated. That was the fabric that the early church was woven out of. And now, here's what I know. All of us are part of different kinds of communities, right? So maybe you're a part of a workout community. Maybe you're a part of a hair salon community. Maybe you're part of a McDonald's at 5 in the morning community. Maybe you're part of a hobby community. Maybe you're part of that community that gets together every Saturday and tailgates hard at Alabama football. We're all part of different kinds of communities. The question is, what separates a biblical community from those other kinds of communities? And the answer is very simple. The gospel. The good news of Jesus Christ. That's what separates this community right here from all those other communities that we're a part of. But we're good news people. We're a community that is rooted in and around the good news that all of us, can we just be honest, all of us show up broken and messy and frustrated and anxious and worried and not quite put together. Which is why we have specifically said we want to be committed to knowing, loving, and building up one another, because all of that is possible once we agree on this fundamental truth that what we all have in common this morning is that we are pretty broken and busted up and fractured and messy people. We're pretty imperfect, are we not? Anybody perfect in here? I see a lot of no's. So here's why that's good news. Because it reminds us that what unites us in this room is not how well put together we are. Like, I just don't assume that you're put together. And you shouldn't assume that I'm put together. I assume that walking through our halls every Sunday and sitting in this room are people whose souls desperately need Jesus. Every week. And so we can drop the pretending. That's what we mean by we want to know one another. It's that we don't have to be pretenders, because we know that the one thing Romans 3 tells us we all have in common every week is that we're sinners in need of the grace of Jesus. So we can stop pretending and get to know one another at a real deep level, not a surface level. Hi, I'm good, brother. Man, we got to get past that. Luke is saying that's not how they operated in the early church. They had deep, honest relationship that was formed over time, built on trust, rooted in the gospel. So we want to know one another. Second, we want to love one another. That's part of what we mean by community. We want to love one another. The language Paul uses to describe this in Romans chapter 12 is literally this. That's what he says, love one another in Romans 12:10. And that language is literally this language of our guts should tingle when we get together. Now that's a little weird, but our guts should tingle. So we're still in that stage of our family when I come home from work or a meeting or whatever, and our kids hear the door slam, our middle daughter, our oldest daughter is too cool, but our middle daughter runs to the door and she'll sling it open. Daddy, you're home. You're home. And it just still does something. It makes something in me respond that she is excited that I'm home. She's happy to see me. She loves me. And that's the idea that Luke is trying to help us see. That's how the early church operated, with this kind of deep-rooted, gospel-shaped love for one another. That I can't wait to show up and see my family, my spiritual family on Sunday mornings. It's just a priority for me. I'm going to be there because I want to know these men and women, and I want to love them deeply. Are we always going to agree on everything? Probably not. But can we get past that little hump and get into deep-rooted gospel love? We know one another. We love one another. And then part of what it means to cultivate community is, third, we build up one another. So here's the good news of the gospel. Jesus Christ has put to death the divisive, slanderous gossiping that I see so many pastors on different groups I'm a part of just grieve that their church is steeped in. And it breaks my heart because they're drifting from the good news of the gospel, which is Jesus has put to death anything that would pull us away from encouraging and speaking life into and building up one another. Rather, the good news of the gospel is that Jesus Christ has freed us up because of his love, God's love for us in Jesus, to be super overabundant, obsessive encouragers with one another. So we want to be the type of people that when that negative, harmful, damaging, critical thought that sometimes pops out of our mouth and we justify it by saying, I'm just being honest. What if more than that, you've been called to be an encourager and to build up and to love and to speak life into? That's the kind of culture that the early church operated in, and that's the kind of culture that Christ has called us to cultivate as his people. Listen, you don't have to look very far to find negative, critical, disinformation, harmful, spiteful. Just hop on Facebook, hop on Twitter, whatever it's called, and you'll spot in a matter of seconds that we live in a culture that craves negative, that craves critical, that craves harmful, spiteful, show you what you, and Christ saying, no, there's a better way. Now, we can't be that way in here, but we also, if we'll just be encouraging to those around us who don't know the Lord, that might be one of the missional codes that we might be able to crack in our culture today by just being a part of a church that wants to build up one another and just refuse to tear one another down. That's too common. See it everywhere. And Christ is saying, no, you got to draw a line here. We're going to be building up kind of people. Now, that's all explanation. So what I'd love to do is help us think through, okay, community. We're committed to community. We're committed to knowing and loving and building up one another as we strive to grow in Christ. That's the goal of meeting here week after week, is to encourage and love and know one another as we strive to grow in Christ together. That's what we're doing here. That's the first core value we're talking about. Now, how does that happen? Like, how do we get there? How can you and I take steps together to help us cultivate that kind of community that knows, loves, and builds up one another? And I just want to give you 6 very practical, very on-the-ground way to do this. Okay, so this will be on the screen. I'd love for you to take some notes on this because I think this will really help us get this out of the sky and into your lap. Here's the first one that I would say, okay, how can you as an individual, as a member of our church, help us do this? Here's the first one. Every time we gather, take the initiative to introduce yourself and welcome one person you don't know. Now, that's not profound. Nobody went, what? But here's what I'd say. Just this it's going to be awkward. We can embrace the awkward. Take 5 seconds and just look to the other side of the room. Go ahead and do that. My guess is you just saw somebody whose name you don't know, whose life story you don't know, who has been here for weeks and months maybe, and you haven't quite got to know them. One of the easiest ways for us to cultivate community is just to take that step of hopping off the pew, walking across the room, saying, hey, my name is Johnny, man. I'm so glad you're here. If your name's Johnny, my name is Sam. So glad you're here. We love that you're a part of our church. How can I pray for you? The bathroom's back there if you need it. Can I get you anything? Just take the initiative to say, hey, there's somebody, we can't know each other if we don't take the initiative to introduce ourselves and welcome somebody into our faith family. Here's what they're finding as people who do these studies, study what happens when somebody new from the street, don't belong to a church or belong to another church or whatever, comes into a space like this with a faith family they don't know. The thing that makes the difference with whether or not they come back, this will shock you, is not the music. For all this silliness about music, it's not the music. It's not even the preaching. The highest percentage of people who come to a church for the first time and then come back the next week is those people who somebody in that church not only introduced themselves and welcomed them to their church, but get this one. This will shock you. They sat next to them in the pew. Listen, I know that somewhere under your seat, your initials are engraved in your seat. What if, just for 1 week, you said, you know what, I don't know her, and she looks like a single mom. He looks like a college student. That's a new, I haven't seen them. I'm going to get up and go sit with them this morning. What if that's all it takes to step into the kind of hospitality and community that Christ is inviting us into? Just you, for 1 week, giving up your seat. What if that was the difference between somebody walking into our space and leaving never to come back and hear the good news again, and somebody walking into our space and immediately being connected to a community? What if that's all it took, was you plopping next to them on the pew? Here's a second practical way I'd encourage you to help us grow in this kind of community. Very simple. Join the connection team. Any connection teamers in here? If you're on the connection team, would you raise your hand? They have a lanyard on. There's about 10 of us, and we want to grow that team by 10 more. What in the world is a connection team? It's very simple. It's exactly what it sounds. Every week, there are people who come in our doors, and they'll come in late and leave early, and won't be spoken to, won't be welcomed, won't be connected with at all. So the connection team is just simply a group of people. We meet at 8:45 every Sunday and pray for God to move in our worship gathering. And then their whole goal throughout the whole morning is just to welcome people to our church, to help get some kind of information where we can follow up with people, to pray for people, point them to the bathroom, take them to the kids' space, whatever. So those teams don't just happen. That takes some planning and some work. But here's what I'll tell you. If we could add 5 more people across all generations to that team, it would help us double our impact in making sure people feel welcomed and at home in our church. And listen, you might be, I'm not really a connecting kind of person. I don't know what that means. Because it looks like for all the world that Christ has invited us into just being the kind of person that can maybe even you fake a smile as people come into our worship gathering and say, hey, I saw you, I haven't met you, my name is Patrick. I'd love for you to come and get lunch with us after worship. We're going to go and eat at Hooligans and eat a burger together. It's on me. Just want to get to know you. We would love to grow that team by 5. It's very simple. You just come up to me and say, hey, I want to be on the connection team. I'll give you a lanyard. We'll plug you into the rotation, and you're in. And you're making a difference. You're making a kingdom impact that you might never see, but that is the difference between somebody coming into our gathering, worshiping with us for a full hour and leaving and nobody really saying anything, and then somebody walking in and feeling right at home immediately because somebody took the initiative and could point them in the direction of whatever they needed and was willing to sit with them and pray for them. So join the connection team. Just consider it. If the Lord is leading you to do that, just say, hey, I want to be on the team. and you're in. Here's the third one. This one's my favorite. I'm not sure what your love language is. I'm a whatever it's called, physical touch. That's me. Here's the third way I would encourage you to help us cultivate this kind of community. Give a hug, a handshake, or a high five to at least 5 new people every time we gather. Now, you might be thinking, that's silly. What are you talking about? A hug, a handshake, a high five. I'm not doing that. I'm not a hugger. I'm not even a handshaker. I don't do high fives. I don't really touch people. Well, here's what I tell you. At least 5 times in the New Testament, the scriptures command the church to greet one another with a holy what? A holy kiss. I'm just saying, maybe a hug and a high five is a pretty low bar. Let's start there and see what happens. Here's why I'm saying that. Because listen, even in your own family, how awkward, how disorienting would it be for me to come home to my little 3-year-old, her run up to me and want to hug me, just kind of a natural reaction out of our affection for one another, and me stiff arm her and say, I don't hug people. I'm not a hugger. Okay, what is that communicating other than there really isn't any affection here at all? Have you ever wondered why the scriptures command, different cultures, sure, that command us to greet one another with a holy kiss? Why you see so much appropriate, godly, physical touch in the New Testament? Laying on of hands, praying over. I mean, Jesus is rubbing his spit on people. Have you ever wondered why there's that element of physical and body touch? It's because God has hardwired us to, through appropriate, godly, correct physical touch, to be a display of affection for one another. So, man, when I'm walking down the kids' space, I want to high five everybody. I'm doing knucks. I'm doing hands. I'm going to hug you if you let me. I want to do a high five. I'm not trying to be weird. I'm just trying to show you, as an overflow of my affection for you in the Lord, this is an easy way for people to feel right at home in our church. Now, if you're not a hugger or a handshaker or a high fiver or a knuckler, that's okay. What if all it took, though, to help someone feel welcomed and at home in our church was a simple handshake and a warm smile on a Sunday morning? You don't know, we just have no idea how people are coming into this room. We just have no idea the kinds of burdens people are carrying. And we have no idea how that one word of affirmation could change their whole week. So the invitation here is, hey, what if, for just a moment, you took a deep breath, put a hand out, gave a hug, said, I'm so glad you're here. I love that you're here, sister. So glad to see you this morning, brother. What if that's all it took for you to help us move the needle as a church to cultivate this kind of community? Number 4, go out of your way to serve at least one person in a way that, here's the key, inconveniences you. Now, we're about to go eat a meal. We're all going to have opportunities to do this. So let's all watch one another to see how we do. So we're going to go down to lunch, and when somebody's eating, would you just grab their plate, say, hey, let me get that for you, and throw it away? How hard would that be? How easy would that be? That's inconvenient. I don't want to do that. Or if this food's gross. What if we just said, hey, let me get that for you? What if you see somebody struggling with their plate, with their cup, with whatever? Hey, let me grab that for you and take you to your seat. Let me help you get settled in. What if you see a parent, a family, and kids are all over? You just offer to just wrangle the kids so they get their food and go sit down. There are 1,000 ways that we can serve one another by going out of our way to make sure people feel loved and cared for and a part of our faith family. I mean, I've been so grateful these past couple of weeks as the demon of the stomach virus has set up shop in our home. How many people have just gladly just asked, hey, can we bring you crackers and Gatorade and Sprite and whatever? They're going out of their way to go to Target, which is never convenient, to bring us some stuff that we could use. I feel so grateful to the Lord, and I feel a part of a community. So what if that's all it took, is out of the overflow of Christ's love for you, who laid down his life for you, that was his act of service. We, out of the overflow of that reality in our hearts, said, I want to go out of my way to serve one person this week. And yeah, it's going to be inconvenient, but Christ was inconvenienced on my behalf so that I might be willing to be inconvenienced for others for the sake of community. Now here's the last one, and one that is really, it affects me. Here's the last one. Help us make our church, let's together. When you see help us, read, let's together make our church as warm and welcoming of a place as possible for babies, kids, and families. Let me give you a passage that continually blows my mind. Matthew 18, Jesus, his disciples come to him, and they ask a really great question. They say, hey, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And what did he do? He didn't point to Caesar. He didn't point to a king. He didn't point to David. He didn't point to a rich tax collector. He didn't point to a politician who was well-respected. He didn't point to the people, the social media influencers. What did he do? Hey, little Johnny, come here. And little 3-year-old Johnny walks up. And Jesus puts him right beside him and tells this whole crowd of people who are asking, how do I get into the kingdom of heaven? How do I become a great one in the kingdom? He points to this little kid and says, truly I tell you, unless you turn and become like one of these little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this is the one who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And here's the line that is just been so working on my soul this week. And whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. Did you hear that? Whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. Jesus seems to be saying to his disciples that part of our calling, not just as Christians, but as a church, is to be as warm and welcoming and protective and caring and loving of kids as anything else. Whoever welcomes just one child in my name welcomes me. And over again, you see these scenes in the Gospels where kids are constantly running up to Jesus. He's putting them on their lap. He's multiplying their Lunchables. He's doing a lot of things with kids to communicate to us, hey, kids matter in the kingdom. There's something about them, their faith, their humility, their trust, that carves and chisels off some of our crustiness, our lack of faith, our struggle to trust. That is a good example for us, and the general calling based on these kinds of passages is, hey, church, let's be a place that is warm and welcoming to babies, kids, and families, especially as the number of single moms and single dads keeps going up and up and up and up and up. The church has an opportunity and a responsibility to step into those spaces and welcome those kids and families. And that is why the story I'm about to tell you is so heartbreaking. I was in Atlanta at a conference, sitting at a table with 6 other pastors, roughly about the same age, serving in similar churches. And as you do in these kind of things, kind of like a coaching mentor thing, we went around the table and just said, hey, tell us one thing that you're struggling with, whether you or your church. And this dear brother across from me, I'll never forget it, as soon as it got to his turn, his shoulders sank, and his head fell. And he took a deep breath, and he said, I'm struggling as a pastor because my church doesn't like kids. And we thought, are you being dramatic? It's not funny. Like, church doesn't like kids. Don't you have kids? You had kids. My church doesn't like kids, and I don't know what to do about it. And we said, man, I don't know. Help us get it. I don't understand it. He said, my church is just mostly older folks in their late 70s, late 80s, and they haven't had kids in a while, and they say they want to reach kids and young families, but Whenever we invite families and they bring their kids, and the babies cry in worship, or the kids whine, or make a lot of noise, or crawl under the pews, or just be kids, they snap their heads. They give them this ragey look. And then I find myself having to run after the sermon to go catch the family, say, I'm so sorry, it's not usually like that, and please come back, and we love kids and families, we want you, and they never come back, because why would they? And it's haunting me. I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. I don't know the path forward. I mean, I have kids of my own. We want to reach kids, we want to reach families, but it just seems like we're just kind of stuck here as a church. So I'm just discouraged. I don't know what to do. And as I was listening to him tell that story, two things went through my heart. One, I am profoundly grateful. I don't want to say this to him, but I'm profoundly grateful at how well we love kids and families. Like, there's not a shred in me that, I felt bad for the guy. I didn't resonate because the Lord's been so gracious and kind to us. And this church does such a great job at loving and welcoming and caring for young families. Let me give you just one quick example. Michael and I were trying to think through a couple of months ago how we noticed new families coming every week, and we didn't know how to connect with them. And really, we noticed they would bring their kids in here, which is amazing. We're so glad you're here. But because they weren't quite comfortable bringing them to kids space yet, get that. And so they would come in here, so glad you're here. But we didn't really have any resources, any tools, anything for kids to do in the worship gathering. We had that during the pandemic, but kind of phased it out. And so, long story short, learn from some other churches and put together these worship baskets. Some of you have those in here this morning. And they have just pad and crayon and just toys. But they also have, here's the kicker, they have goldfish and a water bottle. Now, as we were rolling these things out, I got a couple of questions like, hey, does this mean we're letting kids have, food and drinks in here? I said, you know what? I've never seen a cup of coffee or a donut just walk in here without a person attached to it. And I've never seen a bag of goldfish and a water bottle just crawl in here without a kid attached to it. So what if we just tried to say, hey, we want to reach kids and families. And I get that it's an hour in here is a long time with really nothing age appropriate to do. So let's just try it and see what happens. And listen, that was it. But I thought about that. I thought about this brother and how that conversation might have gone over in his church. And yet again, I was just so grateful that we really are. I don't know if you noticed this, but the Lord is really doing something spectacular in our kids' ministry. We talked about this at our family meeting. There have been some weeks where over almost 30% of the people on this campus are in kids' space, 25 kids or so. That's incredible. And I was so grateful that we're a part of a church like that, and yet I was reminded it's so easy if we're not careful to just lose sight of that and forget that our calling as a church is to, especially where we're located, right next to a school with 600 kids, most people don't know Jesus, to love and care for kids and families. Here's the last one, number 6, be an over-encourager. Be an over-encourager. Nobody's ever been over-encouraged. So Hebrews 10 calls us to encourage one another, stir one another up as we see the day approaching. So one way you can help us, we can together make strides here, is to over-encourage. Just be that guy you're just too encouraging. You'll never hear anybody say that. Be an over-encourager because nobody's ever suffered from being over-encouraged. Everybody you know is struggling with something, and something soul deep happens when you speak life and affirmation and encouragement to them. So that's our first core value, community. We want to be a church that is known for building up and loving and knowing one another as we strive to grow in Christ together. And we talked about 6 ways you can do that. Introduce yourself to somebody. Join the connection team. Give a hug, handshake, or a high five. Or you can help us love kids and families and invite them to come and wrap arms around them and point their kids to Jesus and make this a safe place and a warm place for them where you can be an over-encourager. My challenge to you as we close is just this. Would you just pick one of those ways this week and just ask the Lord to help you take that step of obedience? Maybe at lunch, you sit with somebody you don't know and introduce yourself, and you start a friendship that lasts a lifetime. We don't know what the Lord might do. Maybe on the way home, you call somebody and just randomly bring them dinner. Bring them find some way to engage somebody that serves them and loves them that might be an inconvenience to you. Maybe at lunch, you just go around the table and say, hey, so glad your family's here. We love these kiddos. We love to see them, hear them. We want them to be a part of our church. Maybe you just, before you leave, find one person to speak an encouraging word to. One step this week, and we'll trust the Lord to bless it as we strive to work together to become a kind of church that knows and loves and builds up one another as we strive to grow in Christ together. Let's pray as we wrap up this morning. Maybe you're here this morning and you're new to our church, and we love that you're here. And yet, if you're honest, you've never put your faith in Jesus. And as a result, you're outside the community of faith. But at some point this morning, the Lord worked in your heart, stirred something in you, and you have questions about what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. And we'd love for you, as we sing this last song, to respond. I'll be down here at the front to chat with you, pray with you, answer any questions you might have. If you're a member here at Forest Lake, my prayer for us this week is that we just find one of these 5 or 6 ways to help continue to cultivate a culture that knows one another. And not just we know people's names, but we're willing to let people in and say, hey, I'm struggling. Hey, I'm worried about this. Hey, I don't know what to do about this. Hey, I'm just exhausted and I'm tired and my tank is empty. Would you pray for me? As we strive to become more and more a church that loves deeply, I'm so grateful, Father, for how well this church loves one another. That is a gift. It is a blessing. It's evidence of your grace to us. We pray that you continue to make us an encouraging church that is obsessive about speaking life with kindness and grace and mercy, and encouraging and affirming and building up, all the more as we see the day approaching. We put all this at your feet because we know that if you don't do it, it won't happen. So for believers and members of our faith family, help us to become this kind of church more and more and more. We praise you for the ways you've done it in the past year, and we're excited to see how you'll help us move the needle this year. And for those who don't know you, pray that you'd save. Give them the courage to take the step of faith to confess their sin to you, to plead your blood over their life, to put their trust in you, and to respond in obedience this morning. We love you. We exalt your name. Amen.